you have experience of working across jurisdictions. This administration's approach to Europe's AI industry and that specific piece of news on the AI Act, how do you interpret it?
Well, broadly, I do think the European Union tries to be too regulatory against future development of technology versus adjusting to actual things.
You agree on the overreaching part?
I agree on the general overreach part, and I think that it's actually bad for Europe. It's not just a question of like different philosophies. I think I already know of U.S. tech companies that are deploying outdated or older models because you go through the certification process and they go, fine, we'll just leave that. And as we do the next year of development, you get development so fast that like much less good for consumers, much less good for industry there.
Right.
Now, this specific one it's actually more the kind of questions about the regulations in the Act. The actual playbook, as I understand it, is to say, here's your safe harbor boundaries, which is actually, in fact, a good thing to do generally in regulation, which is like, hey, if you drive within these lines, there's not unspecified liabilities. And stability is actually, in fact, a good thing for the development of business. I mean, that's part of the problem with all the craziness around the tariffs. Stability is important.
Well, you make the point that the European Union moved to codify what they wanted the rules to be.
Yeah.
You know, I think about the first 4 months of the administration. We've had David Sachs on the program as the AI czar, but they haven't really codified what they believe the rules for AI should be in the same way that they did with crypto. Would you agree with that?
Yes, because look, what business needs is stability to invest and develop in it. Even if you disagree with the particular regulation, you at least know how to navigate it. If you say it's unspecified, it's going to change, it's going to come, it's going to go, that just makes everything retrench. So it's good to have that kind of thing. Now, that being said, you know, with super agency and, you know, the book I just published recently and all this, it's actually, in fact, we're going to have so many better features for both great things like medical assistance, but also safety features in the future that we shouldn't be trying to impede that through regulatory slowness. So that part of it I agree with, but you also want the stability and clarity. And the rule book, as I understand it, is an effort in that direction.
Without that stability here in the US, you're investing nonetheless. You're creating Manus AI, which is about really important work, discovering drug discovery, particularly against aggressive cancer. Why do you have that commitment to do this in this environment, Reid?
Well, generally speaking, I'm always an optimist. And so I'm always building the future, you know, kind of no matter what, because that's how we create good futures, is by saying this could be great. Now, with Manus, trying to cure cancer, this is a multi-year effort. Like most of my investments are like 10-year efforts. You obviously hope to get, you know, kind of return, like kind of results, you know, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. But you're playing it out into the future. So the fact that there is kind of regulatory uncertainty around AI in the U.S. right now doesn't, you know, kind of, doesn't slow down my startup efforts.
Can I just jump in and counter with something,
yes,
if I may?
absolutely,
so, you know, Manus AI, a long-term, 10-year project with Inflection AI, and I note your position on Microsoft's board, that you turned that around quite quickly, and then, you know, we call it an acqui-hire in that context. Is there opportunity for you to do that with Manus AI with a bigger beast, or is that an unfair question?
Well, it's not. Look, part of when you're a smart entrepreneur and you're a smart investor, you're always thinking, how do I transform an industry, but also what are pivots or changes you might make along the way as kind of plans B.
Okay.
And the decision with Inflection, which I think was a solid decision, is the consumer agent, where you have to spend billions of dollars building the model before you actually understand the revenue model, actually, in fact, is harder for startups to do.
Yes.
If you're doing so, it's like, okay, let's change to a B2B model. It's still going. They got a whole bunch of different B2B clients, and let's do that. But the consumer thing will actually have to be done by other players. And so, obviously, if we made a similar decision with Manus, which we're nowhere close to, then of course we have various plans B in terms of how we operate. But the goal is always to change an industry.
Thank you.
And prosper with AI. And that's where your book, Super Agency, really comes in. And you talk about this cognitive industrial revolution that we're going through that is going to have short-term pain. I go broader picture here and just think about the short-term trade anxiety. How much is that playing into the fact that the bogeyman we like to make of China and the US, well, is China getting ahead in terms of its cognitive industrial revolution because of the instability we're creating here in the US?
I do think that one of the things that the tariff, you know, kind of Chernobyl kind of catastrophe is actually, in fact, aiding China across its entire industry. Like, for example, Europe says, well, if China is a more stable trading partner, for not just manufacturing, but technology and all the rest, then we can rely upon them better. That creates better global markets for China and worse for the U.S. And so I think that part of being smart about, kind of what we're trying to do is we want trading partners and trading allies for our own, kind of industries and our own, prosperity and jobs for American citizens. And so I think that is creating, it's very funny because the rhetoric, of course, is very competition with China, but the actions in terms of, kind of attacking our, allies and friends and partners is anti our efforts.
What's interesting as well is whether some of the real winners that come out of China come over here to the US. Now, the latest news is actually an American investor, Benchmark Capital, are putting money into, not related to yours, Manus AI, which is owned by another company, which is actually a consumer agent. They're just putting in money because they want to expand that Chinese offering here in the US and abroad. How do you feel about some of the wins that China is getting on the consumer agent side and whether the US should be investing in it?
Well, I actually think co-opetition is the right way to approach things like China.
Did you say co-opetition?
Yes.
Thank you.
So you're both competing, but you're also cooperating. I think that creates better prosperity and better kind of peace and all the rest through the world. And so I'm actually positive on kind of U.S. investors investing in kind of general markets and all the rest. But obviously, part of what we want is we want like level playing fields. We want, kind of equal access. Like, I actually think that the general discourse with China is say, look, you restrict all of our technology industry from playing in your field, so we're going to put restrictions on you here. But I think the investment and the ties are actually still good. Now, that being said, I think Manus is actually not per se leading in the agent space. I actually see a bunch of other, players, not just OpenAI, Anthropic, Microsoft, Google, but I think there's a bunch of folks who are doing very strong things, and there's nothing that we've seen from them yet that suggests that they are as yet, caught up to some of the things that are being built within American companies.
You left OpenAI as a director in 2023, I think I'm right in saying. But we've had you on the program before to talk about it. It is the leader in the field, shall we say, of frontier models and now business and consumer-facing applications of that model. I have to ask you what you think the future of OpenAI is in terms of its structure. You are close with Sam, and you speak with Sam, and you must keep a very firm eye on that company.
Well, yes, but in part because they're still doing their mission, which is how do we make AI for the benefit of humanity? The reason why they're shifting the structure is to realize that mission. It's going to a public benefit corp, which allows the board of directors to make decisions for its mission separate from the profit line. And that's actually, in fact, the way it gets the capital to continue to do that. Now, I think OpenAI continues to, like, if people haven't played with their recent kind of chain of thought models with deep research. I mean, I try to do a deep research prompt every day because I think that gives you the lens to the amplification we're going to get with these products as workers in the future.
I've been using 4.0 every day. I also communicate more with voice mode.
Yes.
It's a psychological thing that as a consumer you kind of have to get over.
Yes.
This environment more broadly, a lot of capital is being deployed. Again, I note that you're a board member of Microsoft, but the infrastructure question is still very big. How far ahead do you see the commitment to capital expenditures on the infrastructure side? And is there anything about the willingness to deploy capital that worries you, Reid?
Fundamentally, no. It doesn't mean that we might go, well, look, the most optimum use of capital might have been a slower ramp. But when you do the kind of the 2x2 matrix and you say we don't do the investment and then we fall really behind in building the new franchises, or we do the investment and it's a little early and aggressive, the 2x2 matrix is by far goes out to strategically to go aggressive on it, because the fact that AI is going to redefine industries, that's not in doubt. The only real question is what year? Is it this year, next year, the year after? And so going aggressive is the right strategic model for both startup companies, but also, of course, our large tech giants.
Can you remain bold in this environment, Reid, when, as you say, the lay of the land is changing? We're trying to get any sort of guidance from companies in this earnings season. How disruptive is this moment? How much are you seeing a freezing of business as we know it?
So far, what I've seen in every major AI company has been a commitment to go as bold as they possibly can. And I think that's actually a good thing, because it's partially, again, like I was saying, is like if you go, well, it's going to work in the next 3 years, it's not going to work in the next 3 years for generating business returns, et cetera, and going heavy in investment, the chance of getting caught like basically well behind and offsides is much worse outcome than, hey, if I made a mistake and I invested a little bit too much in infrastructure and CapEx, 2025, 2026, we know that adding intelligence to everything, like, for example, one of the interesting questions for a program like this will be, when is it, and this is a small n number of years, that we will have an AI agent along with us in doing this program saying, hey, let's ask this question, or here's a fact that's really relevant, or so forth. And the answer to that is small n years. 2? 4?
I'm using one now, Reid. Don't you worry.
Yes,
I'm using one now.
Exactly.
Well, Reid, look, boldness. You've been bold in continuing your political giving this year as well. I think in the Wisconsin race, which was more about judges. But I'm interested as to what you're still feeling in terms of your political agenda here and how much you have felt any impact of the money you've given to ultimately the losing side of what this current administration is.
Look, I'm still most fundamentally a kind of an American, a kind of how we build prosperity here, and everything I do is in that vector. And that's part of the reason why, like, for example, when President Trump was inaugurated, I was not saying very many things because I wanted to be as many good things to come out of that as possible. I think that's what we all want. And look, I'm still hopeful for kind of changing, kind of energy regulation and getting advantages from that. I'm still hopeful for, can we apply, kind of software to make government much more effective in services. I'd rather see that than illegal deportations. I'd rather see that than trade wars that are damaging to, like everyday American citizens. That's what I'm still hopeful for, and so I'm still investing in that arena.
And that's very much in line with what Doge purports to want to achieve, right?
Yeah.
Could you just give your views on Doge and the work of efficiency, but also deploying technology to modernize government?
Well, so if what you did is said, hey, what we're first going to do is build data analytics and understand everything and do things where we're then refactoring that in, that might have led to a very good process at the beginning. But kind of going in and saying, hey, we're first going to just shut off all payments and break everything, like that's like a disastrous way to do these kinds of things. So I think they are doing a bunch of less reported good work on, like, trying to make HR records, kind of more, digitalized and process all that in a much more time and economically efficient way. I think that's great. But on the other hand, I think that they, like all the cases that are reported, like, everything from like a catastrophic mishandling of the university system, like not understanding that when you shift the overhead cost, you're basically saying we're not funding any of the science labs anymore. Science labs, like science is one of the ways that we've gotten our American technology advantage. It's like literally like say, hey, let's put concrete overshoes on both legs and run a marathon. It's like no, don't do that. And so being smarter about, like, I don't mean gradual, but iterative, like understand first, then act, as opposed to just like blow it up and then figure out like, oh, was there anything good here?
Talking of HR and changes, I mean, the tool that you built within human resources, LinkedIn, is changing at such a rapid pace right now, Reid. And I feel social media is more broadly. Just briefly, how do you like the look of LinkedIn right now as we all swarm it with our videos and our narratives and our high fives?
Well, thank you for swarming it with videos and so forth. I mean, I obviously, have a sense of pride and happiness with LinkedIn over time. I mean, we've stayed, I think, very true to our focus, which is how do we help people with their economic lives? How do we help people with jobs? How do we help people, make deals, understand the business world, all the rest of that stuff? And so I think like that mission has stayed true. There's always more work. Like when you ask a product tech founder and you say, what do you think? It's like, oh, there's a lot more to do. I still want to see a lot more. And I think, the LinkedIn team is doing a great job.